leaving the stadium's even worse, right? Because you're like, the game's over and you just want to get home. And
again, you've probably been in a situation, and I know it's a little bit more common in the US, where people typically drive to matches, or they'll take an Uber, or they'll kind of take ride-hail services. And then when you're leaving a stadium, when you've got everyone there and they're trying to get out at the end of a match, it gets very, very congested. You're hit by surge pricing in some cases, and that ends the night on a very negative note. A number of visitors coming from places like Europe will be expecting a slightly more seamless way to get in and out of a stadium. And I think where we can really support local transit agencies and cities is helping them provide the options and communicating with attendees at these games so that they know the best way to get out as well.
okay, so let's say that you're all set to go to the World Cup. You won the ticket lottery. You decided to put your last paycheck or last 3 paychecks toward going to a World Cup group stage match. You've made some budgetary decisions that are questionable, but you're excited to go. There's still one more thing to navigate. How are you going to get there? How are you going to get to the stadium? It may seem like a small thing, but we do know that the US is a really car-centric country. Traffic is going to be pretty insane, and there's been reporting that if you do want to use your car, some cities will be charging pretty insane amounts for parking. The Athletic reported that in LA, for example, parking could be up to $300, which in some cases could be more than the actual ticket itself. Not to mention you have hosts such as Boston, which is actually Foxborough, Massachusetts, which is 30 miles from downtown Boston. And you have Dallas, where the stadium is in Arlington, Texas, about 20 miles from downtown Dallas. So you may want to think about taking public transit. The host cities are boosting the public transit options, and there is $100 million worth of federal funding toward improving public transit for the cities. But in a lot of these cities, it's really complex, and you may need an app such as Google Maps or an app like Citymapper. Citymapper is a really popular app in Europe. I have a lot of friends in London who do use it. This is not a plug for Citymapper, but they have done some pretty interesting things around mega events before, like at the Paris Olympics. And I talked to Ravi Jolly, who's on the business and operations team at Citymapper, based in London. He talked to me a little bit about how Citymapper has helped with mega events in the past and some really specific things that it does. Like, for example, Citymapper uses real-time data to figure out how to get you exactly to the gate at the stadium that you need to be at. In London, it's done things like navigated you exactly to the train cars that are air-conditioned as opposed to the ones that aren't. Those are some of the things it's done in Europe. How successful will it be in the US during the World Cup? Well, that remains to be seen. But Ravi talked to me a little bit about some of the things that Citymapper might be able to help people with this summer. And so here's our chat. Well, Ravi, thanks so much for being on the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Would you mind just kind of introducing yourself and telling me a little bit about your role at Citymapper?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, first of all, Talib, it's great to speak. I know we've had a couple of conversations, and really excited to dive into all things football and transit with you today. I've worked for Citymapper for just over 5 years. I sit in our operations team, and I'm responsible for our expansion and partnerships and collaborations with cities, transit agencies, and local authorities as we look to provide Citymapper to more and more riders and citizens across the world. Citymapper, if you're not familiar with it, is a trip planning app that enables users to plan a trip from A to B in a seamless, kind of frictionless manner and enjoy access to public transit as much as possible.
Let's back up a little bit. I'm glad you explained kind of what Citymapper is, because, I mean, would you say it's probably more known in Europe than in the US? Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I would say so. I think Traditionally, you'll see greater access to and use of transit in places like Europe, the UK, potentially Asia, relative to the US. And so Citymapper was founded just over a decade ago. The founder moved to London and actually provided this product to help people travel on the bus network. And from that point, it expanded into a multimodal transport app that enabled users across initially London and the UK, and then expanding into other markets such as France, Spain, Italy, Germany, other European countries, and then other megacities to better plan their route from point A to point B, whether that be on the bus, on rail, on the subway, metro, everything as eclectic as trams and ferries, hovercraft we've recently added into the app as well. We're now live in over 400 cities globally, and that includes a number of markets across the US, which is really, really exciting. We actually are live in all of the host cities, all 11 host cities that will be hosting games going into next year as well. So really, really cool moment for people who might be familiar with using Citymapper in places like Europe, who may be traveling to the US in order to enjoy the World Cup, and will be able to then tap into the familiar interface that they're already used to on an app that they've already found to help them travel around, and then use the same familiar interface to get around places, whether that be Kansas City, whether that be Dallas and Arlington, Texas, to places such as New York, New Jersey, Miami, LA, and some of these other cities as well.
Awesome. Well, I don't know if there'll be any hovercrafts going to MetLife Stadium, but I just one more thing on kind of getting a sense for our US audience about what Citymapper is. Like, how does it compare to something like Google Maps? I mean, doesn't Google Maps also have some sort of real-time data as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are a number of alternative trip planning apps, and Google Maps is one of those. And where Citymapper kind of stands apart is our commitment and degree of quality that we provide. So we have a team of dedicated analysts who work around the clock on ensuring the transport data that we integrate into the app, coupled with the routing algorithm that we use to provide really seamless and personalized suggestions, are as accurate as possible. Now, in some cases, transit data can be very messy. It can have gaps in schedules. The real-time information can be incorrect and not match up to the schedules themselves. And so in these sorts of situations, we as a team, and using our AI-powered tooling, are able to identify these discrepancies and actually go in and fix them. And in some cases, curate additional data so that riders, for example, can see the fastest options, the cheapest options, options that include air conditioning if they're in a hot city, options that avoid walking outside if it's raining. We have a bunch of personalization that we bake into the product, and we do this in a very localized way. So more than 400 cities, we're trying to provide as localized an experience as possible, so users feel that the app reflects the way that transit works in their given location.
Awesome. And we talked about how Citymapper might be more well known in Europe. Is the World Cup the chance to really put Citymapper on the map? In the US? Is this the big one?
I think it's a really great opportunity and a really great moment. The app has existed in North America for a number of years. New York City is one of our biggest markets. We're also very active in other metropolitan areas, places like Chicago. I mentioned Miami as well, Boston, Philadelphia. What's really exciting, I think, about the World Cup is you're going to have a huge influx of visitors from Europe, but also from further afield as well. I think the last estimate I saw was something like 1 million additional tourists coming specifically for the World Cup, which is really, really cool for a number of US cities. Maybe traditionally, some of these cities won't have seen that level of inbound tourism from places like Europe. I think it's a really great opportunity for people to be able to experience places and actually get around and see how they can enjoy the local economy, right? So let's say I'm coming from London to Kansas City for the first time. Maybe I haven't been to Kansas City before. I've heard really good things about the barbecue in Kansas City. And so I think, how am I going to find some of these places? It might be in a more suburban part of the city, and I want to make sure that I can get there as conveniently as possible. I'm coming from a city where I'm used to using public transit. And so that might be my natural instinct, is to pull out my phone and check Citymapper to see how I get to the best barbecue place. It might be a little bit of a different mindset to someone who lives in Kansas City and is maybe more used to driving. And so I think that's where it's going to be an interesting moment to see how people who are visiting some of these locations for perhaps the first time are then going to engage with transportation in order to get around and see the best of what these cities have to offer.
Great. So I haven't had the chance to sample Kansas City barbecue yet either, but I have had Texas barbecue, and so that's a nice transition there. So Dallas and Houston, for example, are both host cities, and we now know that England will play their opening game in Dallas against Croatia. So say if I was an England fan, for example, and I went to Dallas and I wanted to use Citymapper to find my way to the stadium, which, Dallas is one of these cities where Dallas Stadium is actually in Arlington, which it's not in Dallas, right? So you have that extra kind of thing to worry about. Just walk me through kind of how I would use the app. I'm in Dallas and I'm trying to get to the game. How does it all work?
Absolutely. You picked a really interesting example there, obviously. Well, first of all, England traditionally send a number of fans across to World Cup, so I think that's a great example. It's going to be a really interesting atmosphere. Is it the AT&T Stadium in Arlington, Texas? So kind of outside of Dallas, where you might expect that a number of people will be visiting and potentially staying in. And so they've got to figure out, I've got to get from my hotel in downtown Dallas to the AT&T Stadium. And how do I do that? Because I think the AT&T Stadium doesn't necessarily have a direct access in terms of a train station. And so where Citymapper kind of steps in and helps here is we provide that digital companion to the physical changes that will be implemented in order to ensure that fans can get to the stadium in time and efficiently. I believe there are a number of kind of park and ride options that are being provided. There will be shuttles that are event driven. There are a number of physical changes to the system that we are able to reflect within the app so that people who may be familiar with the Citymapper interface can plan their trip and can see suggestions that work in real time as they would normally expect if they're coming from somewhere like London, for example. What's really cool about Arlington, Texas, by the way, is there are services provided by VIA in terms of VIA's shared microtransit shuttles. And so VIA provide a fleet of vehicles that actually circumnavigate the city, and they pick people up and drop them off at their locations in a dynamic manner. Arlington is one of VIA's kind of oldest markets, and it's really, really effective in terms of moving people from point A to point B, particularly during these event-driven spikes in demand. I think the AT&T Stadium hosted a few Taylor Swift concerts a couple of years ago, part of her Eras tour. And I can't remember if it was consecutive days or kind of very close days, but you can imagine the number of Swifties that came into town and needed to get around to the stadium. VIA were able to work with the city very, very seamlessly to ensure that people were able to get to and from the stadium for the concerts as effectively as possible. And so because of the integration between VIA and Citymapper, Citymapper was acquired by VIA in 2023, that means that users will be able to see and plan trips using the Arlington microtransit service as well within the Citymapper app. So that's a really nice kind of connection, and it ensures that people are able to take advantages of additional options besides some of the options that I just mentioned around park and ride and other shuttles that are being put on during the games.
Great. So just to be clear, is Citymapper working directly with each city agency to kind of integrate their data, or can it work in any city just with the kind of information that you already have?
Yeah, so we kind of provide Citymapper as a service. It's a free app that users can go in and download, and they'll get access to a number of features, including some of the trip planning capabilities. They'll see real-time departures. They'll see information on disruptions that are published by agencies and cities. We also can collaborate more deeply with some of these markets, some of these cities and agencies, where we actually help them develop an even more localized experience for both residents as well as visitors. And so that includes additional capabilities and features if they want to offer things like mobile ticketing so that users don't have to queue at stations or kind of at kiosks. It includes giving agency users access to additional tools to allow them to communicate in real time with riders and ensure that riders are guided around disruptions in the network. For example, let's say that there's an unexpected closure of a bus stop. We have tooling that agency users can leverage to actually publish messages directly in the Citymapper app and to update Citymapper's routing algorithm so that trip planning suggestions avoid those areas of disruption. And so we can provide some of these enhanced capabilities in collaboration with agencies. We've done this a number of times, built up a bit of a capability around large-scale events. During the Paris 24 Olympics, for example, we worked very closely with the local authorities to ensure that people are able to move seamlessly between where they may be staying and visiting and the various locations that hosted events, so that they could get into specific stations that were closer to the seats that they had purchased tickets for, so that they were routed around stations that had been closed during the period of the games. and to ensure that they actually could use the Citymapper app and benefit from some of the localized points of interest that we had been asked to implement as well. And so basically providing a really, really localized experience that meant that users didn't have to worry about how they were getting to the games, but rather they could enjoy the games themselves. I think the biggest compliment that I could pay for Paris 2024, it was that for all of the, I guess, justified question marks around how effective the transport system would handle all of the visitors, during the games themselves, they went off without a hitch. And so the biggest compliment is that transportation was not the main story of the games. The games themselves were. And I'm really looking forward to hopefully helping that be a similar case with the World Cup going into next summer.
Yeah, I'd love to talk a little bit more about Paris, because I was reading, some of the features that you integrated were pretty impressive. Like you mentioned seat-specific navigation, because we know that these stadiums have kind of so many different gates and entry points, and just to be able to tell someone, no, go here. I mean, that sounds super impressive. And then also kind of the, explain the points of interest thing a little more as well.
Yeah, definitely. And that's kind of a great example of the depth that we try to go to, the quality and the local experience we provide. And that's made possible through the team that we've got working on this, who are really, really, they care so deeply about making sure that people have the best experience using public transport, and they want people to become advocates themselves. And so with these sorts of like seat-specific routing guidance, we work very closely to understand, with the authorities, to understand kind of where the best entry points to the stadiums were, taking into account, in this case, kind of security checkpoints and road closures and the like, and ensuring that information was integrated into Citymapper so that we could provide very, very tailored results to people searching to get into a particular stadium. I don't know about you, but when I've gone to a football match, for example, it can be a bit of a mission trying to get around an entire stadium. If I've gotten out of a kind of the local tube stop and I'm on the wrong side of the stadium, that can add an additional 15 to 20 minutes or more to my journey. And the last thing I want is to miss the start of the game. And so what we did with Paris in particular was we made sure that that tension would not exist, and we gave people who needed to get into, let's say, the north side of the stadium instructions to travel to a particular metro or subway stop that was on the north side of that stadium and so forth. And I think that those kind of little touches really just make the experience a little bit more frictionless for people. The other great thing about the Citymapper app, it's great for trip planning, but you can also see nearby points of interest, right? And so the FIFA Fan Festival, I think, is a great example where you're going to have, obviously, the game taking place in the stadium itself, but there will be other fan festivals showing the game as well. And so we make sure that we specify the location of the fan festivals and kind of similar points of interest to enable users to very quickly plan a journey that gets them there in as little time as possible, to avoid congestion and to do that in real time, which is really, really exciting. Because again, the last thing I want to do is worry about how I'm getting to the match. I'd rather make sure that I'm there on time and I'm enjoying myself.
Right. And then, you made a great point about how kind of daunting it can be to find the right gate and everything. And then leaving the stadium's even worse, right? Because you're like, the game's over and you just want to get home. And I suppose Citymapper could kind of help in that way as well.
Again, you've probably been in a situation, and I know it's a little bit more common in the US, where people typically drive to matches, or they'll take an Uber, or they'll kind of take ride-hail services. And then when you're leaving a stadium, when you've got everyone there and they're trying to get out at the end of a match, it gets very, very congested. You're hit by surge pricing in some cases, and that ends the night on a very negative note. What Citymapper does is we kind of provide these public transit options and these shared transit options as well that hopefully enable you to have an alternative to waiting in a line and facing a really, really long traffic-driven delay getting out of the parking lot. And so, again, it's my belief that a number of visitors coming from places like Europe will be expecting a slightly more seamless way to get in and out of a stadium. And I think where we can really support local transit agencies and cities is helping them provide the options and communicating with attendees at these games so that they know the best way to get out as well. What I mentioned before around some of these kind of real-time communications tools and detour management tools, those can be deployed very, very easily, and they can be managed in real time so that you can almost ensure on a day-to-day, hour-to-hour, minute-to-minute basis that people are presented with the best way to get into and out of an area. And so I think that's going to be really, really helpful as you consider the significant flow of visitors coming into some of these cities.
Yeah, well, that's good news because often you end up sort of leaving early and that kind of thing, which is not ideal
Yeah.
if you have extra time and penalties and that kind of
Well,
thing, right? So
judging on England's recent performances in the late, the way in which they went through the Euros, very, very late goals, I think no fan wants to be leaving early. And specifically in kind of some of these places where you're paying quite a lot of money to go and watch these games. And I think that will definitely be on people's minds as well. And to that
exactly.
point, right, like if you can take a slightly more cost-effective way of getting to and from stadiums, that somewhat helps with the interesting dynamic pricing mechanisms that are currently being implemented to cover the cost of tickets
Yeah,
as well. So,
absolutely. Yeah, you want to get your money's worth for sure. So one of the big differences, obviously, between the US and Paris is, am I right in saying that the Paris Olympics was strictly no cars? It was only public transport and bikes, whereas the US, obviously very car-centric. Like you said, a lot of people will be driving to stadiums. How does that all factor? Does that complicate things?
I think it's really interesting to see the slightly different cultural dynamics at play here. I guess even speaking for myself and thinking about driving to a stadium, you then have to pay for parking, right, as well. So there is an additional cost on top of the cost of getting there, waiting in traffic and having to then get from your car to the stadium as well, which isn't necessarily right next to it. And so when I'm thinking about that from my admittedly UK-centric, European-centric kind of perspective, it's very different to someone who might see driving to a stadium, putting your car in the lot and walking and then waiting in the car to get out. That might be more familiar and more comfortable. But what I think we have a really great opportunity to do here, and to your point around Paris aiming to push people to avoid driving as much as possible, is we've got a tool that enables a really seamless digital mechanism to access transit and some of these more arguably as convenient an option as driving to a stadium. And that may be less familiar for folks who may be used to kind of getting in their car and getting somewhere. However, the additional flexibility and the convenience that a digital platform like Citymapper provides for wayfinding, for purchasing fares, for booking transit is actually as convenient as getting in your car and waiting and driving. And I think a lot of Europeans will be expecting that sort of experience. And it'll be really interesting to see how locals who are going to attend these games will be able to tap into some of that as well. What we as kind of Citymapper intend to do is provide a localized experience. And so we're really hopeful that we can ensure people who are going to the games or people who need to avoid areas of congestion during the matches can benefit from in equal measure.
Yeah, so it's equally for people, residents or whatever, who are trying to get to work or run their everyday errands around the World Cup.
Yeah, I mean, life continues. Admittedly, hopefully, if people are as excited about football as I am, they'll be watching as much football as possible while continuing to work.
Right.
But
well, England just shuts down, doesn't it? But it's different.
It's crazy, honestly. It's amazing, and it's a really nice moment for the entire country to kind of get together and enjoy, hopefully enjoy, up until the point at which we get knocked out. Enjoy a really shared experience, and irrespective, people still have to work. People still have to attend kind of medical appointments and go grocery shopping and the likes. And again, the worst possible outcome here is that locals get frustrated because tourists are clogging up the roads and causing additional congestion and making it really difficult for people to complete their day-to-day activities. And again, that's where an app like Citymapper comes in. We help combine the physical changes that are necessary to manage these kind of surges in demand with a seamless digital experience. So again, helping people avoid choke points, implementing changes that mean people don't see stops that are closed or where there is additional congestion. We actually reflect in the app where there is expected to be additional traffic congestion, so users have the information to determine whether they want to take an alternative route. We're actually baking AI into these sorts of decisions more and more. We're leveraging our experience of having the app live in hundreds of cities and billions of journeys planned to be able to provide data-driven suggestions to users so that they can decide, I don't mind taking this bus journey even though the app's predicting up to a potential 15-minute delay due to congestion, or potentially I could take this alternative bus route that looks like it might be slightly longer on the face of it, but actually when traffic is taken into account, it's the more convenient option for me. And again, like what we're all about is providing those sorts of options to users so that they don't have to worry about missing something.
Right. That's interesting. I think I read a stat on your website that said something like Citymap has helped 300 million fans go to 10,000 soccer games across Europe. So it sounds like there's enough data for AI to learn from.
Definitely. I mean, we've helped fans get to football matches. We've helped Swifties get to concerts. We've done this in markets from Europe through to Singapore, through to the US. The Super Bowl parade in Philadelphia earlier this year, kind of, again, something as localized as the Super Bowl parade when you consider that we operate in 400 markets. we went in and we ensured that people in Philadelphia and looking to attend the parade had the information they needed to get to the parade on time and understood which bus routes were going to be closed, which stops were going to be closed, and how they needed to ensure that they paid for their ticket in order to reach the parade on time. And that sort of localized experience is what we're really excited to provide for the 11 host cities going into next summer as well.
Yeah, so I mean, talk a little bit more about that Super Bowl parade. So how would that have helped people versus, a Google Maps or something?
Well, in some cases, the information that's available is only published last minute by a transit agency. It might not even be fully known right up until a few hours before what's going to happen. That tends to be an extreme case, but it can happen, and we've seen that happen. And so what we tend to do is we look at kind of historical patterns, and we understand whether event-driven shuttles are going to be put on, or we look at where the data suggests that there will be a stop closure, and we reflect that within the app itself, and we actually communicate with riders. We use the Citymapper app. We can publish messages, we can publish long form communications that users can see in detail and consume in detail, that actually tell them this is what's going to happen, this is where your alternatives are, and this is what you should do if you're having any trouble or experiencing issues. We often partner and collaborate with agencies, and that may range from us redirecting users to agency websites where they can learn more, to actually giving agencies the tools to communicate directly with riders through the Citymapper app as well, and making sure that the agency is able to reach people who are on the go and need that information in real time. That's a really powerful mechanism to avoid additional friction and dissatisfaction. And so with the Super Bowl parade in Philadelphia, in this case, we kind of made sure that we reflected the stop closures within the routing algorithm, and we made sure that we presented all of the information relative to the parade to our users so that they could get there on time.
Got it. And then you mentioned earlier that you can route users to air conditioning friendly zones or things like that. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if you've been in London recently during the summer, but we're starting to experience some very crazy heat waves. Obviously, this is very common in places in the US as well. And so, again, we try to come up with really creative and fun ways to help people get around. We don't want them to kind of struggle in these situations. And so we implemented a few years ago now what we called an air-conditioned routing feature, which essentially prioritizes and provides suggestions for users on subways and subway lines that are air conditioned in this case. So some of London's tube network has air conditioned carriages, some of it's not air conditioned yet, unfortunately. And so in this case, we provide suggestions that prioritize the conditioned carriages. And then that was so successful that we actually rolled it out in additional markets during heat waves, following both in London and kind of in Paris and other markets as well. And the kind of reaction to that sort of thing is always really exciting to see when you're seeing users who are saying, thank you for not making me carry extra deodorant on my train journey, and thank you for helping me not upset other people in my carriage, and these sorts of things, which is always really fun.
Yeah, I guess I didn't even know that some of the tube was now air conditioned, because I remember it not being for a long time. Yeah.
Thankfully, we're going in the right direction with these sorts of things, which is great. And again, makes it easier. It gives people one less reason not to take public transport. So
exactly, yeah. Just kind of summing a lot of what we've talked about up. What's kind of the core goal behind Citymapper? Is there a sustainability aspect? Is there an idea of, we'd like to get more people cognizant about the public transit options and out of their cars, and which is not only a kind of environmental plus, but also an efficiency plus as well? I mean, is that part of kind of the mission?
Definitely. I 100% agree with that. Kind of our entire focus is making cities usable and ensuring that as many people as possible can access and benefit from more sustainable modes of transportation. I think you raise a really interesting point there around a bit of stigma around using public transit. And without meaning to call out the US, I think the US market is very different to somewhere like a London or maybe a Paris, in the sense that it's not always the default to assume that you can go and reach somewhere, whether that be work, school, the hospital, the grocery store, using public transit. And we really, really want to shift the conversation around transit and making it more accessible and almost baking it into day-to-day life for people who might historically not think about using the train, taking the bus, using the subway, potentially using a hovercraft one day. I think that's really, really a lot of what fuels our team's work and our focus, is seeing some of the reactions that we get when people realize they can utilize public transport. And we put in as many unique, fun features into our app as possible to ensure that people enjoy their time on public transit, whether that be air-conditioned routes, whether that be localized points of interest, kind of some of these more fun and unique parts of the product. I think that's always really, really nice. And the reaction that we get from people who we manage to convert to using Citymapper is always really nice to see. I've lost count of the number of social media comments I've come across where someone has said, "Thank you, Citymapper, for saving my marriage. I was able to make it from work where I had a meeting very late to the restaurant where I was meeting my wife, and I wasn't late for that." Paraphrasing, but kind of you kind of see the sentiment. And then people who've thanked us for helping them get jobs because Citymapper tells them which carriage to get onto in order to get out of the station as fast as possible when they alight on the subway. And that means that they make it to the interview on time. And making sure that where there's a stop closure or a disruption at a station, we're giving them alternative guidance, which again means they're able to avoid potentially being caught up in disruption, and they can make their interview on time. There are too many to kind of recount one by one, but it's really, really nice to see that. And I think it's just, it really resonates with me because you can see how transit can genuinely make a difference in people's lives. And I know I speak on behalf of our team when we really want to make sure as many people as possible are able to benefit from utilizing public transportation.
Wow. So no pressure then, only
pressure.
People's marriages and livelihoods on the line.
And I will add to that, as a pretty kind of keen football fan, I would be very, very upset if I didn't make it to see England play Croatia on time in Arlington, or if, French fans are also coming in. I think France are playing Senegal at the MetLife Stadium, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, yeah.
I don't think anyone's going to be happy if they can't get from Manhattan into Netherlands effectively. And again, these sorts of things are where we want to do our bit and ensure that people don't miss the start of the games.
Yeah, especially if you've paid, $2-3K for a ticket, which is a whole other topic. But well, Ravi, thanks so much for joining. This was super interesting. I appreciate you taking the time.
No worries. Thanks for having me. And I think I mentioned before, right? But the biggest compliment I can pay is if transport is not the story of the World Cup, and we've done everything we can, hopefully in collaboration with agencies and cities, to ensure that people can move about as seamlessly as possible.